grown over the years, and it's so important we all work together and get you all enrolled. So our next speaker is Rebecca from DHREAMS.
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for inviting me to speak. This is my first opportunity to be at the CDH Family Conference. Although DHREAMS has been involved with CHREAMS and CDHi for a very long time, this is my first time here, and I'm very appreciative of being able to come and meet families and put some names to faces. Thank you. I'm also very grateful that we figured out the mic situation because I lost my voice earlier this week, and the idea of trying to project into this room was just not going to work well. Excuse me. I will have to take the occasional cough break as well. I apologize in advance. So, as previously mentioned, my name is Becca Hernan. I'm a genetic counselor and a research coordinator for the DHREAMS study, which is the Diaphragmatic Hernia Research and Exploration Advancing Molecular Science, which is just a very long way to say that we also study the genetic architecture and causes of congenital diaphragmatic hernia. So the DHREAMS study is a multi-center study that's been going on for about 15 years. And as Mauro mentioned, we have actually recently partnered with NGH as well, and we've been working with them very closely over the last couple of years. Excuse me. But in addition, we also have 15 centers within the United States. 11 of them are currently recruiting to this study, and 4 of them are in the process of being onboarded to this study, which can sometimes be a bit of a lengthy process, but we're working with them, so we're glad to have people coming on board. In addition to that, we have 4 international sites, 3 of whom have been recruiting for us for a very long time, and 1 that is just now finishing up their onboarding process as well. So we have an extremely large team that is working with us, and we're very grateful to have this type of collaboration. And with this entire team working together, we've been able to enroll over 1,200 families within the DHREAMS study over the past 15 years. So as Mauro may have mentioned, having those types of numbers is really what allows us to advance this type of genetics research. Unfortunately, in the world of genetics, it's often a numbers game. The more numbers we have, the better chance we have of really analyzing something and being able to understand it. So, what exactly is the DHREAMS study? Now, many of you may be familiar with this, but I'll kind of go through it anyway. The DHREAMS study, like I said, is really trying to understand the genetic causes of CDH. And so this first research goal we have is kind of the driving force behind it. And we really want to develop this better understanding. Now, if you look at our pie chart over here and imagine that that is every person in the world with CDH, we really only know the genetic cause for those people about 10 to 30% of the time. That's a pretty small slice of the pie. The goal is really to make that a much larger slice and one day fill it out completely, with the idea that if we have this type of information, we can pursue our second research goal, which is to really give information to doctors and researchers that allow them to improve their ability to diagnose CDH, give prognostic information, or tell families kind of what's coming down the line, and hopefully one day we'll be able to prevent CDH. Excuse me. And then kind of the final research goal we have, which in many ways we think is probably most important, is to really help individual families understand what is the cause of the CDH in your family. How did this happen? And perhaps, is this something that may be at risk to happen again? If it is, what are those risks? May it happen in this family or in a future generation? Our goal is that if we identify a genetic cause for your family, we'll let you know that information and we'll tell you what that means. Is this at risk to happen again? And what does that mean for you? So as previously mentioned, this can help in family planning as well. So when we talk about genetic research, what do we mean? What exactly does that mean? It's this big, kind of huge word that we talk about, and we spit out a lot of information at the end. It says, we did research and found this information. Well, I'll hopefully shine a little bit of a light on that. In order to do that, I'm going to go through a little bit of a genetics primer. So, everyone, welcome to Genetics 101. It's a really easy course, I promise, and there are no tests at the end. All right. So my general genetics spiel is if you go ahead and take a single cell from any one of our bodies and you zoom in on it or look at it under a microscope, you'll see our genetic information, our DNA, and it's packaged on those blue structures there called chromosomes. Now, our genetic information is what allows our bodies, our genetic information is a set of instructions that allows our bodies to grow and develop. If you look at those chromosomes and zoom in on them, you'll see essentially a string of DNA, which is really a string of letters. Our bodies go through and read that in defined segments that are called genes. Those genes go on to be read by our bodies to create a protein that does some sort of job within our bodies, often many, many jobs within our bodies. The last point here is that we all have about 20,000 genes, which is a really big number. We have 2 copies of almost all of those genes, and we get 1 copy from mom and 1 copy from dad. That'll be important when we talk about inheritance. So generally speaking, when we think about the genetic causes of CDH, we really put them into 2 large buckets. The first is chromosomal, which is looking at either an entire chromosome or perhaps pieces of a chromosome that may be a little bit changed that may have caused or be associated with the CDH. And the second bucket is really these single genes, and that's a lot of what we're looking at now in the current research. So is there a change within this particular gene that may be associated or cause that CDH? When we're looking at chromosomes, we do a test called a chromosome analysis, and it really just gives us this, which is a picture of our chromosomes. You'll see we have 46 chromosomes. They come in pairs, and we get 1/2 of each pair from mom and the other half from dad. The first 22 pairs are pretty much the same in all of us, and then this last pair here are called the sex chromosomes. They determine whether we are genetically male or genetically female. The picture I have up here is male because there's an X and a Y, and females actually have 2 X chromosomes. This may be familiar, but I like to give a pretty quick overview anyway. So when we're thinking about chromosomal causes of conditions or congenital diaphragmatic hernia, we wonder, is there a particular chromosome that may be missing? Or is it possible that we have another chromosome that's been added? So this person has 47 chromosomes. What you see up here is a person with 3 chromosome number 18, That's called trisomy 18, or also Edwards syndrome, which has been known to be associated with CDH. The next thing we think about on a chromosomal level are slightly smaller pieces. So is there a chunk or a piece of this chromosome that may be missing or extra? If it's missing, we call this a microdeletion. And if it's extra, we call this a microduplication. So you see we still have the same expected number of chromosomes. They just look a little bit different than we expect them to. Now, there are many microdeletions and microduplications that we know very well and have been associated with CDH. There's been a lot of research that's gone into that as well. The next bucket that we think about, which is where our research is really headed at the moment, are really these single gene causes. So remember, if we take a single chromosome and zoom in on it, we can look at a gene and see that defined segment of DNA. So this is essentially the symbol for a gene that I'll use. So when I'm talking about single gene mutations or single gene changes that cause CDH, what does that mean? Well, one way I like to think of a gene is a sentence. Our bodies read that sentence, literally read it, create a protein, and that protein does some sort of job. What does that mean? Well, this sentence happens to read Batman. If our bodies read this correctly, they go on and create Batman, who can go do whatever he needs to do, stop crime, and be wonderful. However, if there's a change, 1 or 2 letters are changed or missing or added, it can be a little bit different and it may not look quite right. So when our bodies read this change, they create something that's not quite right. Cute, but very clearly these 2 things are going to do different jobs. Now, as Dr. Langoni pointed out, there are many, many, many genes that have been associated with CDH. So the challenge when we talk about testing is how do we look at all of these genes? How do we identify them? How do we generate the data so that we can identify them? So we do this through a process called either whole exome or whole genome sequencing. Now what that testing does is it actually reads or sequences all of our genetic information. That's a lot of information. Remember, we have 20,000 genes, but those 20,000 genes actually only make up about 1.5% of all of our DNA. So when we do whole genome sequencing, we're sequencing about 3 billion base pairs. This is a lot of data that's being generated. Excuse me. And in large part, that's why genetics is a number game, because it's a lot of data on an individual person, and if we can compare that data to a large set of people, that helps us better understand what we're seeing. So now that we've done our Genetics 101, and as promised, no tests, I'll give you a quick DREAMS update. So if any of you are involved in DREAMS already, you may have received a newsletter that we sent out in December telling about a new genetic cause of CDH that we recently identified and we were able to publish last year. So we identified this gene, MYRF or MRF, as a new genetic cause of CDH. What you're seeing on this slide are called pedigrees. So there are 4 separate pedigrees, and it's essentially a way to draw a family tree. Squares on this slide indicate males, and circles indicate females. So if you're looking at our 3 males and our 1 female who are colored in, they're colored black, those children all had CDH. Their parents are not colored in because none of them had CDH. What we identified when we did this testing is that all of these children had a mutation in the MRF gene, different mutations, but they all had a mutation in the MRF gene that caused it to not work properly. It either created a protein that looked slightly different or a protein that was much smaller than it should have been. That's denoted by the plus that you can see underneath each of those squares and circles. The negative underneath their parents means that we didn't see this same mutation in their parents, which really means that this was a brand new mutation found in each of these children. This is what's called a de novo mutation. This idea of a de novo mutation is really where DREAMS is focusing our research at the moment. And the idea that de novo mutations or brand new mutations may help explain a large number of these CDH cases. A big reason for that is that most CDH is actually sporadic. It's the only case found within their family because the familial variants have been very rare and they're extremely helpful in identifying genes, but they can't help us get all of them. So we're trying to focus a little bit on the de novo genes to see if we can identify it, which worked in this case because that's what led us to the gene MRF. Now, remember, we only found 4 families that have a mutation in MRF, and we have over 1,200 families enrolled. So this is a cause of CDH, but it's an extremely rare cause. It's far less than 1% of all CDH. Additionally, we found that all of the children who had a mutation in MRF had complex CDH that Mara was discussing. So in addition to a CDH, they had an additional birth defect. Sometimes it was a heart defect. Sometimes it was a genitourinary defect. After we identified this gene, we then scoured the literature to see if there were any other people out there who were identified with a mutation in this gene, and we found them. Not a large number. I think there's about 8 in total that we were able to publish on, but the other children that we identified actually didn't have a CDH, but they did have some of the other birth defects. So they had a heart defect, they had a genitourinary defect. What this tells us is that while mutations in MRF absolutely are associated and can cause CDH, it can cause a number of birth defects, and it's not the same in every child. So that's called a variable expression. This is another issue where we see a change in the DNA, and we're not entirely certain what that is going to mean for a child until we're able to examine that child. Excuse me. All right, so this slide is really just to show you that this is a list of some of the genes, single genes that we know of that are associated with CDH. It's kind of a long list, but I have to tell you, it's certainly not comprehensive. It is a limited number of genes. What I really want you to get from this slide is the idea that this is complicated. There are a lot of genes that are involved in CDH, and that is one of the main challenges, not only of understanding the genetics of it, but in understanding how to best treat it, how to best prevent it. If you contrast this with cystic fibrosis, which we've been talking about earlier, CF is associated with a single gene, it's CFTR. If you have cystic fibrosis, you have a mutation, 2 mutations in that gene, and if you have 2 mutations in that gene, you have cystic fibrosis. That is not how CDH works. And that's the reason that it's so complicated to do this type of research. And that's the reason that we really need large numbers of people in order to do this research, because we need to complete this list and fill out the rest of those genes that we're still missing. Another thing I'd like you to see on this slide is that a lot of these genes are associated with complex CDH. And the reason for that is that if there's a complex CDH, it's often just easier for us to identify a genetic cause, because if there is a genetic change that you have, it can often go on to do, again, multiple challenges and create multiple birth defects in a child. You'll notice that almost all of these are not inherited, which means that they are generally a de novo mutation, but there are a couple of genes that are inherited, ZFPM2, which Amaro talked about as well, and that is associated with not only isolated CDH, but also complex. So I think the main point to take from all of this is that there's a lot of different stories that can be told. One gene can have a lot of effects, and there can be many, many genes that all have the same effect. So the idea behind this is, how do we really figure this out? What do we do? Well, as I've been saying all along, we need people, we need numbers, and DREAMS participation. This is where I'll talk a little bit about being involved in DREAMS, and if you're interested, the best way to do it is be involved. So who can participate? Anyone in this room. If you have a family member who has had CDH, if you have a child who has already been repaired from CDH, if you're an adult with a history of CDH, if you have a pregnancy that's been diagnosed with CDH, you are all eligible to be involved in research if that's something that you're interested in. The goal really is to make sure that all families who are interested in being part of research have that opportunity. We try and make it as simple as possible, so if anybody actually wants to enroll today, I'm here, come find me, I'll set up at a table. But we just ask you to sign up. We're going to ask some basic information, and then we'll ask for a DNA sample. That sample can be obtained either through a blood sample or a saliva sample. Don't worry, there's no blood happening today. I only have saliva samples available today. And then afterwards, if anyone signs up today, you'll actually speak with a coordinator in the coming weeks, who will most likely be me, and we'll just have some follow-up information and get a little bit of clinical information about your family, as well as some additional family history. So when we're talking about samples, who are we looking for? Who are the best people to really provide this saliva sample? Well, first of all, the person who's been affected, the child with CDH, the adult with CDH, is first and foremost the person that we want to get, and then if they're available, the biological mother and father. If for some reason that's not okay, somebody is not here today, not a problem, you can absolutely still enroll. We've had families who their parents are not available for any reason, and they are enrolled and they're able to be part of this research study. And it still adds quite a lot of information and data to DREAMS as a whole. If someone isn't here and you think that they would still be interested in participating, I will send you home with a kit, and they can spit in a tube and send it back to me. We'll get in touch about how exactly that happens. And just as a heads up, there's no cost to any families to participate in this type of research. Also, if anybody does enroll today, rest assured that you will actually not be involved in the research until after you've spoken with the coordinator. The goal behind that is to make sure we answer any questions you may have, and also to make sure we have some additional clinical information for you. That can happen either via a phone call, which takes about 10 to 15 minutes, or if you prefer email, because talking to people on the phone is terrible, I have a little email questionnaire that I can send out, and that's not a problem either. Also, as part of the DREAMS study, what happens after people are enrolled? Well, not only do we ask for a DNA sample and some clinical information on you, we like to keep in touch. So you may get an annual email from us right around the time of your child's birthday asking for some health information. It's about a 5-minute questionnaire to fill out online. And if you are enrolled with DREAMS and you did it through one of our sites, we'll actually do a more comprehensive assessment later on when the child turns 2 and 5 years of age. Again, if anybody is enrolled and you have new contact information, you've changed a number, you've moved across the city or moved across the state, or actually left the country, which I've had a few families do, let me know, because we want to make sure that we can stay in contact with you. The reason for that really is because if you enroll in the study and we are able to identify the genetic cause for CDH in your family, we want to make sure we can contact you to let you know that information, if that's something that you wanted to learn. So as always, if you have any questions about DREAMS, check us out. We are on Facebook. I will be totally honest and tell you that I am the person running Facebook, and I am not very good at Facebook. I'm working on it, but I'm not very good at Facebook. But you can also check us out at the website. Our website not only has information about DREAMS, it also has a lot of good information about congenital diaphragmatic hernia in general. We have an FAQ section that can hopefully be pretty helpful to a lot of families. It also will keep you up to date on our latest research. We have copies or links to all of the publications that we've put out there. Some of them are extremely esoteric and over everyone's head. But if you're ever interested in finding out what that research is, you're always welcome to reach out. I'm happy to send any papers to you, and I'm also happy to send you a little blurb so you know what those papers mean. As always, my contact information is there. It's all over the website, so if you ever need to get a hold of me, people do, send me an email, give me a call. Email is probably the best, just to be truthful with you, but you can give me a call as well. I have to say, we have a huge number of people to thank for the DREAMS study, not only for the recent MRF publication, but for all of the other publications. I know when Julia came and gave this talk 2 years ago, she told you about another gene that we had just identified, which is called GATA4. So all of these people have been involved in that. And you'll see that MGH, Dr. Morrow Longoni, Dr. Donahue, all of their team are involved in that. We have surgeons, pulmonologists, doctors from literally all over the world. We have research coordinators, the team within the lab who actually analyze the staggering amounts of data that we have. And then also the funding. We've been extremely lucky to have several NIH grants to support us through for DREAMS. But more importantly, we've had a lot of families who have supported and donated, and I cannot tell you how incredibly grateful we are for that type of support. So I really want to say thank you to all of the families who have participated in research and all of the families who are here and are trying to build awareness for CDH. We really, literally could not do this type of research without you. And our goal is to really help serve you as best we can, and we do that when you help us and let us know what's going on. So,
does anyone have any questions?
I noticed with your guys' research that you go from parents to the CDH affected kiddo. What about the other way around? What about, like, I know a couple of moms that are CDH survivors that have had pregnancies. Have you guys done any work with those families?
we have, yes. I can't tell you anything kind of right off the top of my head where that's identified, but to be honest, the reason we do the trio analysis is because we're really trying to identify those, at the moment we're trying to identify those de novo mutations, right? So if we see a change within that mom who has a child of her own, if we see a change within that mom, we want to know if that is a change that she inherited from her mom or her dad. And unfortunately, we can't kind of go the other direction. So the most powerful trio that we have is really the affected child and their parents. But that being said, we have enrolled entire families and really trying to better understand what's going on both sides of that generational line.
Were you talking about like other siblings, or you were talking about from the parents'
A
side?
survivor that became a mother that has kids. Just how is the genes differently? The other way around, I guess. I don't.
No, I think it's,
that correctly.
I think I know what you're talking. It's complicated, right? It's complicated. So the idea is that we're looking at mom's genetic information, right? So half of her genetic information is passed on to every single one of her pregnancies. But we already know what her DNA, what her genes are. And the idea is we could use that as an analysis kind of based on what her children's phenotype is. So if any of her children also have a CDH, that could help us understand if there was a particular gene that was passed on and seems to be only in the children who had CDH but not in the children who didn't. But it's a little bit more challenging sometimes, especially if she didn't have any children with CDH. So then we don't know. She clearly passed on her genetic information. Did she just not pass on a gene that is associated with CDH, or did she pass on a gene, only it's incompletely penetrant, meaning that in some people it shows a CDH and in some people it doesn't show a CDH. So it's a little bit tougher to do that direction.
I guess I'm just curious about family members passing it down and having never born, but still passing it down generations later. So like, if my son has kids and they don't have it, but they could potentially be a carrier, they could pass it on to their kids generations.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And that's actually a little bit of the challenge, right? So the question we have is that, is there always a single gene that's responsible for a CDH? So in every single family, will I be able to identify one gene and say, this is it, this is what caused the CDH in your family? I don't think so. We're actually talking about polygenic risk scores, which is a whole different talk that would require another 45 minutes. But in short, what that means is that maybe there were a couple genes that were working together that may have caused a CDH in that one particular person. So then the question is, when they have children themselves, they pass on all of those genes, all of those variants of those genes, just some. So it's a little bit more complicated, and you're absolutely right that people wonder, you know, am I a carrier, am I at risk to have this? And unfortunately, until we really have the genetic information in front of us, it's a tough question to answer. Yeah. No, I think that was it. I hope that answered your question. Okay, good.
So in that vein, I'm a survivor. My grandfather was diagnosed when he was 90 with CDH. And my brother was one of the explosive. We thought that was going to be because my mom was supposed to develop when she was pregnant, but now maybe not. Anyway, the only genetic material that I have from my grandfather is the hairbrush. And I know you guys are at this point only doing saliva and blood. Are other tissues on the horizon?
Other tissues are always there. I'm talking about saliva and blood right now because that's the simplest thing, but I have worked with many families to get many different varieties. I would say give me a call and we'll talk.
Yeah, I'm already in the dream study, just me. My mom didn't want to do it. My dad passed away. My mom was paranoid. But, you know, now, like, my brain is reeling. I'm like, I don't have questions. I have ideas. Oh my God, come here. I need to speak the brain. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Come find me. We'll talk.
Okay.
There are some questions over here.
So the study, is it just the parents and the CDH child, or do you collect siblings, or who else do you recruit into the study?
We actually work along the same lines as the MGH study. We start with that core trio because that's the most informative trio. And then if we see something that we want to kind of investigate further out, we may ask for additional siblings. So especially in the case of familial CDH, we're going to ask for additional siblings, family members. But every now and then we may come back on a case-by-case basis and say, hey, we would really love some more DNA samples to help us better interpret something that we've seen. So we start with that core trio and then kind of work out from there.
Because I think that that's really within the family, and it is really a big question, not just among my children who are non-CDH, but my brothers and sisters, my husband's brothers and sisters, their children, and their children all look at my CDH child and say, is that going to happen again? And I think that's sort of the lines you were going with your question is, and every doctor that my daughter has, and she's 20, my CDH daughter, they've all said the same thing. It's not time to answer those questions for them yet, and they all said the same thing. It's time to get in this study.
It's frustrating to hear that. The reason that we start with the trio and we don't go out to the greater family until we have something to look at is because I could sequence the entire family and have all of this information and still not know what it means. Right? So we start with the group that's going to give us that information, and then once we have it, then we start talking about testing for the family. Because unfortunately what I can do with that type of testing, and this does not just apply to CDH, this applies to genetic disorders kind of across the board, is that if I test a family member without knowing the cause of the disease in this individual, I test this family member and they come back with a negative result, what does that mean? Is it actually negative or not? Yeah, so it's frustrating because we can't answer that question for the family yet. And it's kind of like, oh, let me give you everything and we'll be able to figure it out then. But unfortunately, you really have to start with an answer, or at least a more focused question, and then go out to the rest of the family.
So I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly, but I heard de novo means there wasn't an identified mutation in either of the parents' gene, and so that the child could be the first one that had the mutated gene. Yep. Can we at least, like if me and my family were studying, which we haven't, would we know that? Would we be able to be given the information that like we have de novo or no?
You're in the DREAM study?
Yeah.
Yes, so if we identify the cause and we,
So it has to
Yeah.
be identified.
yes, so we have to know what it is first, yeah.
Gotcha.
And then that's part of the when we return that information, that's part of the conversation that we have, and that's a conversation that involves myself. I'm a genetic counselor. Our principal investigator, Dr. Wendy Chung, who's a molecular and clinical geneticist. So that's a comprehensive conversation that we have that tells you, was this a brand new mutation? Was it inherited? And in all of those situations, what does that mean for your family specifically?
Do you have any links to anybody in
For a site, I do not, but do you?
Canada?
You should also come find me and we'll talk.
I thought you'd see it.
Becca, okay, I'm just make sure I heard this right. You guys are now taking hair samples or no?
That is really going to have to be a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
Yeah. We will take additional tissue samples. We can do things from, we can do samples from family members who have passed, kind of depending on how the sample has been stored. It really is honestly a case-by-case basis. I will be totally honest and tell you that hair samples are often not helpful or viable because they have to have a specific piece to them, and even then it's probably not going to work out. So hair samples generally don't.
So all the grieving parents who have locks of hair, those probably will not work because the root's not, okay. I'm just asking before you get flooded.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, all right. And then we had an online question for both you and Mauro from Marta, who is in Sweden, wanting to know if you know of studies over there. And I responded and said that you guys are international, but just to reiterate, in both of your studies, it doesn't matter where families are, they can participate, correct?
Absolutely. We have not only our international centers, but at Columbia, I'm employed by Columbia University, we are able to enroll any families internationally, and we send saliva kits all over the world. I literally have families from every continent who are involved, so you don't need to be in the United States in order to be involved.
Does anyone have any questions for Becca or Mauro before?
I did. I'm sorry. He had talked about not being able to identify specific environmental factors such as specific drugs or specific, specific like, oh well, this is because of Lovenox or this, specific brands. But is there specific types of drugs like maybe like blood pressure medications or like in general is there a specific?
Is there a class of drugs? I think that Mauro said it right in that the research is not there to really show that something is strongly associated. So at this point, there's nothing specifically, whether it's a specific drug or a specific class of drugs that's associated with, that's associated with a CDH.
So is the only thing holding this research back is participation and funds?
That's really the big hurdle, is making sure that we have families involved, and of course funding is, all research needs funding, but really it's getting people involved and making sure that they are able to be involved. So yeah.
That is one thing really frustrating as a parent, that you don't
of people don't know how much that kind of stuff costs either. Like the cost of the research is it's a little bit of money. And I think that that is something that people don't really focus on, is that, oh, well, they just think that because you're at a hospital that it's getting done, but to really break it down, like this is what it costs, like to run this lab test, it costs X amount of money. I think that if people really understood that it does cost money to have these research and it's not just something that's given, I think it would be forward moving and figuring out why this happened to us.
A question we get in our CDH support groups is once they participate in DREAMS, do we get information back? We have many families that'll say, well, I've participated and I don't have answers. They haven't contacted me with answers. And we'll have families that'll pop in and say, well, I've heard back from DREAMS and this is what they're telling me.
Yeah.
So in most cases, we won't hear from you. Is that correct?
And that's the frustrating part that I have also had a lot of families talk to me about, is that excuse me. Remember, right now we only know the genetic cause of about 10 to 30% of all CDH. That's with our current knowledge. And we are building that knowledge, absolutely, but it's a slow process. So if we identify a genetic cause for a family, we do reach out and let you know that information. But many families won't hear from us because A, there's 1,200 families and one of me. But more importantly, it's because we don't just look at your information once and then move on. We keep your family's genetic information in our database, and we reanalyze that data set over and over and over and over. So we've looked at families 5 years ago and we're unable to identify a cause, and then we look at them now with all that we've learned, not only through DREAMS, but through the MGH study, through all of the studies worldwide in the published literature, and we can see something and say, oh, now we know what this means. Now we've identified it. So we don't ever want to come back and say, I'm sorry, we don't have an answer for you, because that may change in the years to come.
Also, I've contacted her several times. She will call you back.
If you're ever
She
curious,
will message
if you ever want to know what's going on, reach out. I'll let you know. I can look into it. But oftentimes, if we haven't reached out to you, it's because we just don't have an answer yet, and we're still looking.
We have two speakers who are Skyping in, so Kristen's going to be on in a minute on our Facebook, and for those who are on our Facebook, she'll be starting a new live feed. We're going to end this one, and then she'll start one, and then we will be back, and then we will have another speaker who is going to be through our Facebook as well. And I just wanted to touch on something real quick that you guys brought up a second ago, and that's research funding. And NIH funds very little money for CDH. Marcia Dimes funds no money for CDH anymore. There's no big money for CDH. So I know that as a charity, we are constantly asking money from you guys to keep our doors open, to provide services for families, to pay for tote bags, to pay for conferences like this, because these things are not cheap. And then also to provide things that we can't provide, which like financial assistance and funeral assistance and all the many things that need to be funded, but research as well. And in the U.S., it's particularly hard for families because of the medical bills. In Europe, it's much easier to fundraise because their medical bills are paid. And over here, a lot of families are already struggling, and then you have back and forth. But it's up to us. And if we don't fund research and we don't fund services for families, no one is going to do it for us. There will be no government that's going to step in and fund the research that our kids need. I mean, if you knew how much money that NIH gave CDH versus CF, it's ridiculously different, the amount of money that our kids get. So we beg for fundraisers and help and donations and telethon because we are barely keeping our doors open, but also for research. So the researchers are constantly asking us for money so that they can keep their labs open. So we really, really need to work together. So I'm telling everyone here and the 30,000 people on Facebook that there's a reason that as a charity we ask for money, because we need to help pay for lab kits. We need to help, them pay for postage to send these kids back and forth around the world, as well as to fund our database so that universities can tap into that and all the many, many things that we have going on. And there's so many research projects that are not public yet. But really the kids only have us. And I know that's a massive amount of responsibility, stress, and I am not passing a hat right now, just so you all know. But I just want to reiterate how important that is, so that if we don't do it, no one is going to help our kids. So it's really, really up to us. Okay, so we're going to switch over to Kristen. This is the first time we have done this, so bear with us.